Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. My name is the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sinclair. I'm joined in our chancel this morning by our worship associate, Mary Kay Stillwell. We say here that we are about the work of transformation. We say that the Unitarian Church is a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform the world and transform ourselves. That's a really big vision, and it's a hard vision to live up to sometimes. Part of that vision is welcoming all who come in and then figuring out how we're going to be together in community, sometimes after we're all here and after we're all a little grumpy with each other. That is good and joyful work. That is the work of religious community. That is one of the things that separates us from a voluntary organization like the Sierra Club. They also do great work, but here it is a spiritual discipline to say, how will we remain in community? What will we do together, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard? So, we're going to talk about that over the course of the day. Our theme for this whole month has been welcome as we begin our congregational year. And today we're going to pick up on that particular story of welcoming even when it's hard. So welcome to this day. Welcome to our time together. It is good to be in community with all of you. And now we'll light our flaming chalice with words that Mary Kay will introduce.
I light the candle, this candle, offering the words of Joan D. Chittister. Hospitality is the first step toward dismantling the barriers of the world. Hospitality is the way we turn a prejudiced world around, one heart at a time.
So we're trying. So we're trying a new thing this year. It's actually a new old thing, which is singing the same hymn once a week for a whole month, a hymn that fits the theme. The theme for September is welcome, and so the hymn that we chose was Come, Come, Whoever You Are. And we've already sung it twice. The first time you had the somewhat musically inept minister trying to lead it as a music director. Last week we had our choir director here, but here we now have a new accompanist who is just learning about this right now because I forgot to tell him before the service started. So our opening hymn is number 188 in the gray hymnal, Come, Come, Whoever You Are. If you've been here the last couple weeks, you probably know it. We are going to try it as a round. So, Jack, this is up to you. We'll do it as a two-part round. Would you like to cue the parts, or would you like? Okay.
Shelly's going to help me.
Perfect.
I already enlisted Shelly. She'll take that side. We'll take this side. You can help us out, Oscar. But let's see.
I'll be yes.
Yeah. You've sung it too well, so you really know it. I'm going to play I love lover of leaving. I'm not sure what that means.
We'll talk about it.
Be somebody who loves to leave. This is a song about welcome. Let's think about what that means. To love leaving. I'm going to keep going.
If anyone would like to come forward for the story, you're welcome to do so now. Our story today is called, hello, friend. Mullah Nasruddin feeds his coat. This is a story that is adapted from a Middle Eastern Islamic folktale, which is attributed to different countries, including Turkey and Syria. Mullah Nasruddin had been working in the fields all day long. He was tired and sweaty, and his clothes and shoes were covered with mud and stains. And because he had been fasting all day long for Ramadan, he was also quite hungry. But finally, it was almost sundown, and Nasruddin knew that he would soon be able to eat. The wealthiest man in town had invited everyone to come break their fasts. Oh my goodness. Break their fasts in his home that evening with a huge feast. Nasruddin knew that he would be late if he went home to change his clothes before heading into town. He decided it was better to arrive in dirty clothes than to be late. And I can relate all too well. Oh, what a party it would be. What a feast. And as he walked to the wealthy man's home, Nasruddin imagined the delicious foods that he would soon be eating: dates, lentils, and chickpeas, olives and bread, hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts: halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. When Nasruddin arrived, the wealthy man opened the door and looked Nasruddin up and down scornfully, from his worn, ragged clothes down to his muddy shoes. Without a word of welcome, he gestured for Nasruddin to come in and walked abruptly away. Nasruddin joined the throngs of people who were all dressed in their finest clothing. The tables were laden with all sorts of delicious foods: dates, lentils, and chickpeas, olives and bread, hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts: halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. Despite his efforts to hurry, the seats were all taken, and nobody tried to move over or make a space for Nasruddin. In fact, nobody offered him food. He had to reach over and around people to get any food for his plate. Nobody spoke to him. It was as if he wasn't even there. The other guests ignored him so completely that Nasruddin could not enjoy the food on his plate, no matter how finely prepared and how tasty it was. In fact, after only a few bites, Nasruddin was so uncomfortable that he decided to leave. He hurried home and changed into his finest clothing, including a beautiful coat. Nasruddin returned to the feast, and this time the host welcomed him with a huge smile. Come in, greeted the host. And as Nasruddin entered, people waved and called to him from all corners of the room as they invited him to sit near them and offered him food. Nasruddin sat down quietly. Picking up a plump fig, he carefully placed it into his coat pocket, saying, "Eat, coat, eat." And next, he took a handful of nuts and put them into the pocket, saying, "Eat, coat, eat." Now he began to feed his coat in earnest, grabbing all sorts of food. He fed the coat lentils and chickpeas, olives and bread, hummus, falafel, chicken and beef, and best of all, the desserts: halva, date rolls, figs, and baklava. Nasruddin became silent as they watched this very strange behavior. And soon everyone in the room was staring at Nasruddin, wondering, what is he doing? The host hurried over. "Nasruddin, what are you doing? Why are you feeding your coat in this manner?" "Well," replied Nasruddin, "when I first came to this feast in my old farming clothes, I was not welcome. No one would speak with me, but when I changed into this coat, suddenly I was greeted warmly. So I realized it was not me that was welcome at this party, but my clothing. And so I am feeding my coat." And that is the end of our story. As we sing our next hymn, the children are dismissed back to their classrooms.
We're guest music next.
I'm Kim Zeman, a member of the Board of Trustees. This community is not just what happens on Sunday mornings. The Unitarian Church of Lincoln exists in the events that we gather for every week and in the joys and sorrows that we bring to our gatherings. Please join us later this week for our third Thursday service. Jason Slaughter will be sharing his experiences with small group ministry. Sign up today with Kathy Disney if you want to attend or assist with the Odo Missouri Welcome Lunch on Friday, September 22nd at noon. More information is available in your e-blasts. Also, we will be hosting the first and second Unitarian churches from Omaha to continue our conversation with beloved community. Plan to join us on Saturday, September 23rd at 1 p.m. for conversation, followed by ice cream snacks. We will meet in person and via Zoom. I want to offer a special welcome for those of you who are visiting for the first time. We hope that you will join us for coffee and conversation in the gallery following the service. Our community sets aside time to tend to each other in times of joy and in times of sadness. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the steps on our journey. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in the fabric of our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share those threads, and then they are woven together with those of others in our community. Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. I invite you to speak into this shared space or type into the chat your name or the name of another you wished to be remembered in sorrow. And I'm going to share the name of my cousin, Alan. David. Mark. Mary. The people of Libya. Kara. The Anderson family. The Robert Lang family. On our chat, on the live stream, Dom, who has COVID. And from Abby Swatworth, healing for my father, Alan. He's recovering from surgery, and thoughts for my dog, Charlie, who is not feeling well. We know, too, that joy is intertwined with sorrow, so please share into this space or type on the chat that the names of another you wish to be remembered in joy. Grandson Nova turning 1 this week. Arya. All the people who brought delicious food to the potluck last week. Sunny. The Huskers. Right, there's nothing on the chat right now. We know, too, that there are some joys and some sorrows too close to the heart, but still deeply felt. Let's hold a moment of silence for everything unspoken. Thank you for your presence.
So our next hymn is number 18 in the Gray Hymnal, What Wondrous Love Is This?
This is one of those gorgeous old shaker tunes, and as far as I know, the shakers have all died out. But the last line of the song is, "With thanks unto the end I will sing." So the shakers are gone, but the music will keep going. I'm going to play through it once, and I'd like for y'all to hum along with me, and then we'll sing the words. Come along.
One of the long-standing traditions at this congregation is that once a month, we set aside a collection to support the work of our partners in the community. The partners that we recognize every year are chosen by the congregation at their May annual meeting. I was not there this year. So this is the first time I've actually had to introduce the Share the Plate program. So it is a pleasure to welcome back Mary Choate, the Executive Director of the Center for Legal Immigration Assistance. There we go. CLIA, to talk a little bit about the work that they're doing. Up here, or if you want to use this mic, either one is fine.
Hi, thank you everyone so much for inviting us here today. CLIA was founded in 2001 to meet the demands for low immigration assistance in Nebraska. Even today, there is still a low amount of services for legal immigration assistance, even though it has been better. Since our founding, we have served over 10,000 with their immigration assistant needs. Now, not only do we provide legal immigration assistance, recently we have a variety of programs, such as our mental health assistance for victims of crime, such as domestic violence or sexual assault. CLIA has a staff of 8 to help these immigrants and refugees full-time. This includes, of course, our immigration services, mental health programs, and our Uplift program we have with partnership with Legal Aid of Nebraska. Now, I could tell you about our services we provide all day, but I wanted to tell you a story of someone we do help with our programs. And I have a variety of stories, but this one came to mind today. We have Maria, who came to the United States with her daughter, who was 12 at the time. Maria had escaped gang violence and domestic violence in El Salvador, and she wanted her daughter to be safe and secure in the United States. So she made the arduous journey to go to the United States and keep her daughter safe. When she got here, it was very scary and she needed to adapt. So she met someone. She met someone who seemed very nice at first. His name was Jose. Jose seemed, he took care of her daughter, he got her a job, everything was going well until it didn't. Jose began to control her movements and prevent her from talking to her family. But then it proceeded to get worse when he became physically violent. One night, he threw her out of the house when she refused to give him money, and then she had to go to the neighbors to call the police, and she reported the crime. It was rather quite dire. So she got help with advocates in the community who referred her to our services in Nebraska. She was able to get help with us. We were able to help her apply for a U visa, and she was also able to get mental health help with our organization as well. Now, there are a lot of people who go through what Maria went through in Nebraska and, of course, across the United States. And we do our best to guide Maria and people like her through the immigration process and to provide them stability during a very traumatic period of their life. Sometimes it's quite difficult with immigration laws being complex and lengthy, but we do our best, and we just want to provide them a little bit of hope for the future so that they can have their stability. I want to thank you again for inviting us today. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. As Oscar mentioned, today Share the Plate is the Center for Legal Immigration Assistance. And so all the loose cash checks with CLIA in the memo line will be offered to CLIA. You can also do electronic giving. Text UCL Lincoln in the amount to 73256. That's UCL Lincoln, and the amount to 73256. You can also donate through Realm. Click Donate and specify Share the Plate, so it'll be recorded to their account. Will the ushers please come forward? The offering will now be gratefully received.
So my daughter Ailish is in the first grade. And I don't think I realized 6 years ago just how many of my sermons would begin with, "So my daughter Ailish." So my daughter Ailish woke up this morning and decided that she was going to pick out the tie that I was going to wear today. And she picked out this tie, I'm sure not knowing that if the Orioles win this afternoon, they'll clinch their first playoff spot in a decade. Not a Baltimore crowd. Go Huskers, they won too, but the Orioles have been bad for a long time, and apparently my daughter has subconsciously picked this up and is celebrating with me. That is not the subject of the sermon. My daughter is in first grade, and her class is in the middle of a unit on fables. Fables from around the world. And the other day, Stacy and I were driving with her to some event or another, and we asked what stories she was learning in this class about fables. She said, "Today I learned the fable of the half chicken." The half chicken? Yes, she told us then in great detail the story of a chicken with one leg, one wing, etc., who struggles with where to belong before finding his purpose as a wind vane. We were confused. And then, because we live in the first half of the 21st century, I Googled from the passenger seat of our car, half chicken folklore, and discovered the story of Medio Polito, well-established folklore in much of Central America. And the moral of the story is not about the half chicken. The moral of this sermon is not about the half chicken. Ask Ailish if you want to know more about that story. but a reminder that folk tales are a way to transmit wisdom from generation to generation. And we don't always know the depth of folk tales in the world around us. So the story this morning is one of those. Mullah Nasruddin is a folk hero in much of the world, probably based on someone who lived about 1,000 years ago, somewhere in Central Asia. He's claimed by Turkey, he's claimed in the Balkans, he's claimed by the Uyghurs. He's a character that appears across stories and genres, a kind of holy fool who, in his occasionally enigmatic sayings, is both funny and profound. So he doesn't just appear in the story of him feeding his coat. There's another famous one that begins, once Nasruddin was asked to deliver a sermon. And when he got to the pulpit, I didn't write this. He asked, "Did you know what I'm going to say?" And the congregation replied, "No." So he announced, "I have no desire to speak to people who don't even know what I will be talking about." And he left. The people felt embarrassed and called him back again the next day. And this time he asked the same question, and the people replied, "Yes." So Nasruddin said, "Well, since you already know what I'm going to say, I won't waste any more of your time." And he left. Now the people were really perplexed, the story goes. They decided to try one more time and again invited the mullah to speak the following week. And once again, he asked the same question. "Do you know what I'm going to say?" And this time they were prepared. Half of the congregation said yes, the other half said no, and he said, "Let the half who know what I'm going to say tell the half that don't." And he left. This is not the method that we are learning in the Tuesday night worship seminar this fall at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. Still, there is a lesson here. This motif of trickster characters, holy fools uncovering truths, shows up over and over again in folklore. When I was Ailish's age taking a fable class, we learned a lot of stories of Anansi the spider. Or you could talk about Loki the trickster god, or Robin Hood, or here's a fun one, Jesus, who talks in parables, stories that illustrate some truth about the world. Stories that illustrate the truth of things in unexpected ways. So in the story Chelsea told this morning, Nasruddin is invited to a feast. There are a lot of versions of this particular story, and what kind of feast it is sometimes changes. Sometimes it's a religious festival. Sometimes it's the wedding of Nasruddin's friend's child. But regardless of the feast, Nasruddin shows up at the party straight from the field, muddy and a little out of sorts. Sometimes he's refused entry, sometimes by the host at the door, sometimes by a group of young men guarding the party. Sometimes he's let in, but the other guests don't acknowledge him because he does not look like he belongs. And so he returns home and comes back to the party in his best coat and re-enters the party easily. Once in the party at the buffet, he starts feeding his coat, saying, "Eat, coat, eat, because you are the guest of honor here, not me." Okay, so what does that story mean? This is not a rhetorical question. Shout it out. What does that story mean to you? Any guesses? Don't judge a book. Dress better. Okay? You don't have to dress. You don't have to dress nice to go to church. Yep. Take food while you can. He's not the one who needs to clean the coat. Yes.
We had a minister from the pulpit scold this congregation for not dressing up sufficiently to come to church.
Okay. I don't think that was me.
It was an interim.
Okay. So one of the ways that I learned to enter into these stories is to tell them over and over again, but to think about who you are in the story. What perspective you have, which character you relate to. Is it Nasruddin? Is it the host? Is it the other guests at the party? So we'll go through that for a little bit. What if we imagine ourselves as Nasruddin, the perpetual outsider? Does anybody feel a little bit like that? Yeah, actually, you don't need to raise your hands. We have all felt like that at some point in our lives, I promise. We talk in 2023, this is not in folklore, but now, about the idea of code switching, about being one person in one setting and another person in another setting, and having to do work to present in a particular way in a particular setting. So who in this community feels like they have to put on a coat to be taken seriously? Yeah. So when I go to a school board meeting, for instance, I do it in a jacket and tie as Reverend Dr. Sinclair, not as Oscar, the slightly frazzled dad, in a t-shirt and sandals with socks. This is one of the grim moments of my late 30s, is discovering that sandals are more comfortable with socks. But I do that not because I think that there's inherent value in a jacket and tie, right? But because that's the literal coat necessary to be taken seriously in that setting, right? If I want to be welcomed into that setting and I want what I'm about to say to be heard and taken seriously, then I have to literally put on a coat. So what about here? This isn't a school board meeting, but here. You don't need to identify yourself, but I imagine that even at a Unitarian church, there are people in this room who heard that story and thought, yeah, that's about how I feel every time I go to church on Sunday morning. I have to wear my best coat, metaphorically, or shave. In some way, not bring your whole self if I want people to talk to me at coffee hour. Does that feel plausible? There are some nods of recognition. If that feels plausible to you, that's why we talk about hospitality so much at this church. That moment right there. Because for as much as we talk about it, we know that this happens in our congregation. We know that people come in and they're like Nasruddin in the story. They're welcomed in the door and then they're iced out during coffee hour or in committee meetings or otherwise made to feel like they don't belong here. This is human nature. It happens all the time. The way we get better at it is by practicing it and talking about it a lot. That's why we talk about it a lot. When people feel not welcomed, when they show up not knowing or not having the capacity to follow the unwritten expectations of how you show up in this space, what you wear on Sunday morning, metaphorically or literally, apparently. But in some ways, it's actually really easy to imagine ourselves as the hero of the story. It's easy to imagine ourselves as Nasruddin in that story. It feels good to be the trickster who calls out the hypocrisy of the world, right? What about the host? Anyone see themselves in that role? Because that unnamed host is the hero of his own story, right? How would we tell the story from that perspective? Maybe it's his child's wedding, and he's distracted by making sure the food is to everybody's satisfaction. Maybe he's hosting a visiting delegation, and he wants to make a good impression. Maybe it's a fundraising meeting for a new business, and he looks Nasruddin up and down and decides that this does not look like a potential donor. Maybe he and Nasruddin are old friends, and he is appalled at what he sees as disrespect from his old friend, not bothering to go home and change before the party, but showing up, tracking mud into his house straight from the field. And maybe, rather than confront Nasrudin, he decides to not say anything, but also not really engage, and just say, all right, come on in. Anyone see themselves in that? I do some days. When we host things, we want to control them. That's also natural. Stacy and I take a lot of pride in our ability to host events at our home. Gatherings for other clergy in town, cast parties for shows she's in, movie nights for the church. And there's a give and take when you open your home, right? Between being a gracious host, welcoming people in, and wincing internally when the carpet you just washed gets muddy, even though you put out a sign saying, please take off your shoes as you come in. Right? And then how appalling when a guest calls you out for being inhospitable, when it's not the guest that did all the work to make the party happen or to clean the rugs, or that will have to clean the rugs after the party ends. So we did this exercise going through a fable and saying, who do we identify with in seminary? We did it with the story of the prodigal son. You remember that story? So wayward son goes off, blows in his inheritance. Elder son stays at home, manages the farm. Young son comes back, says, I have no money, I've blown my inheritance, please take me in as a laborer. And the father says, we shall have a feast for my son who was dead and is now alive. And then the elder son goes out and meets his father in the fields and says, Dad, I've been here working for you this entire time. Where's my feast? I didn't go anywhere. I didn't blow any of my inheritance. I'm right here. I've been working this entire time. And the father says, your brother was dead and now he's alive. Anyway, it's a story about forgiveness. But when you asked a bunch of seminarians who they identified with in that story, statistically, people that go to seminary are likely the eldest child. And more than a few of us went through that story and went, yep, that's me. That elderly brother is me. Responsibility is its own way into the story. But what about the largest group of people in the story? The guests, the other guests at the party. The ones who don't say anything, but who ice Nasrudin out when he first arrives, only to greet him warmly and share a meal with him when he comes back in his coat. I actually think this is most often who we are at the church, right? We collectively are rarely either the host or the guest, but we are the gathered body making implicit assumptions. Because there's a way to read this story about shared expectation. There is a negative way about societal expectation, right? Behave and dress the proper way and be rewarded. Show up in your best coat, join the feast. Break that box and be shunned. Show up from the field, don't be welcome to the feast. And there's a way that we should interrogate this in the framing of that story for all of the rest of the guests. Is it possible that everyone is inhospitable to Nasrudin because they are all wearing the same uncomfortable coats in order to conform? They had to put on a coat that doesn't really fit, that they don't really want to be wearing, but that's what they felt like they had to do to be welcomed to this feast. And then this guy shows up, straight out of the field, expecting to be part of the feast too, calling into question the implicit norms that they are trying to reinforce. So the problem with implicit norms is that they are awful if you don't know them or can't follow them. If you're neurodivergent, gender nonconforming, not able to talk about your 401k. there are so many ways that we exclude people. And while some of us have more than others, I bet just about all of us have some story of feeling like Nasruddin when he shows up at that party. And all of us probably have some version of being a guest at that party, wearing a coat that we don't really like, but we feel like we have to wear. So if that's the case, how do we all take off the coats that we are wearing to try and fit in? And figure out how to be a community in a riot of tuxedos and tie-dye, all together. That's what we talk about a lot. There's also a positive way of framing this whole conversation about coats in a Unitarian church. Because this is also not a rhetorical question. What is a covenant in our setting?
An agreement.
An agreement? Suggestions, okay. Guidelines. Commitment. Expectations. Okay. Relationship builders. So we say in Unitarian Universalism that we are a covenantal, not a creedal people. What that means is we are defined not by our shared beliefs. There isn't a list of these are the things that you have to believe in order to be Unitarian Universalist. But we are defined by our shared agreements of how we will be together. That's what membership is. We welcomed new members to the congregation yesterday. They came forward and signed the book. What that's actually doing is saying, I agree to abide by the covenant that we have as members of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, how we will be together. Covenant is voluntarily entered into. You can't require it of anybody, but it is enforceable. If somebody's out of covenant, we point it out. We have ways of getting back into it. That allows for human flourishing. So covenant is the underlying structure to our community. You can think of it like music, right? Unitarian Universalists are improvisational. We like to bring our own individuality to this space and our community together. The covenant is the chord structure underneath that improvisation. Right? If we're all playing the blues, then the covenant is the 12-bar blues, the chord structure that allows the melodies and harmonies to come together, to allow everybody to express themselves, but not be just noise, not be discordant. That's really hard to do. The other piece of covenants is that they are always aspirational. We are always falling short of them. We are always calling each other and ourselves to do better. So there was, this is going to sound like a digression at first, but I promise we'll get there. There was some nonsense on Unitarian Universalist Facebook this week. This may be a thing that only terminally online Unitarian Universalists picked up on, but we're going to name it here. So the UUA has a new administration, and one of the things that they are figuring out is how to do social media advertising online. And so the UUA on Tuesday, I think it was, put out a meme online. It was an image with text on it. And it said, "You'll feel at home in a UU congregation if you're looking for a space in which you can be open and be your true self." Good so far. "We honor all people for who they are, regardless of their actions and decisions." Good, okay. Unitarian Universalism welcomes us holistically. To many people, our faith feels like coming home. So basically, by about 2 hours after that went online, the collected, very online Unitarian Universalists had made a sound not unlike what just happened in this room. Because that's getting at something of who we are, but it's missing that covenantal piece, right? We honor all people for who they are, regardless of their actions and decisions. No, that's not who we are. So to give credit where credit's due, we have a new UUA president named Sophia Bettencourt. And about 6 hours after that went live, they amended it, and then she put out a statement. And so rather than try and explain the theology behind this, I'm just going to read what she wrote. Because we now have a PhD theologian as the UUA president, which is going to be fun for the next couple of years. Anyway, Sophia wrote, Unitarian Universalism is a progressive religious movement in the midst of deep work around accountability, covenant, and the ethics by which we hold one another's relative safety and well-being. Yesterday, our main Facebook page posted language stating that we honor all people regardless of their actions. This is simply untrue, and I apologize on behalf of the UUA for the distress raised by this language. And then she said, and this is the jump that Sophia gets credit for me. I want to take the space here to explain why this language was rightly such a cause for concern. To imply that any and all actions are honored here is not only incorrect, but it conflicts with the theological center of our tradition. Universalism is about personhood, not behavior. In other words, our faith makes the radical claim that everyone is born beloved, that no one is beyond the reach of love's embrace, and there is always the possibility of redemption and repair. But because our faith is communal and covenantal, it also calls us to directly address harm, both interpersonal and systemic. We are called to hold one another in love across a range of past mistakes, across a range of beliefs, across a range of identities and perspectives, and a great many other things. We teach that there is always a path back into beloved community. But the covenant that lies at the center of our faith is grounded in love itself, and that love requires that we hold one another accountable for our actions, and that we do the work of repair when we have caused harm. Thank you, beloveds, for your feedback and your depth of care for our values in the public square. What does that have to do with Nasrudin? The covenant is the thing that makes the party possible. You can tell that story about societal norms, and that's actually the most important way to tell that story. But in the context of this little moment that we had at the UUA online, the story also becomes one about what our agreements are with each other. The agreement's not about who is welcome. Everyone is welcome. Always. Period. End of story. But what actions are welcome? In some ways, what coats do you wear? Right? Everyone is welcome, but it matters how you behave. So what's the difference between those two ways of thinking about the coats that we wear to the party, right? There's one that says societal norms are terrible and we should do whatever we can to tear them down. The other one says, well, covenant is actually the agreements that we have with each other to all say, well, we're all going to show up in our suits to this party. Here's what I think the difference is. It depends on making the implicit explicit. Societal norms and covenants are both constraints on behavior. They both say, here's the things that we do in order to belong to this group. But societal norms are implicit and forced on everyone, regardless of whether or not you choose, regardless of its impact on you, regardless of how it impacts your ability to go forward as fully yourself. Covenants are voluntary, and they are explicit. They are the things that say, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That is an explicit covenant on our wall, the thing that we lay out as a ground rule for what matters here. That's the coat that we ask Unitarian Universalists to wear. But we cannot be in covenant if we don't wish to be. That's the other important part. If you don't want to follow a covenant, that's fine. But that means not being a part of the community in the same way. So within this community, our role is to be explicit with our expectations of each other, to say out loud the things that we expect of each other, to be really careful that the things that we expect of each other aren't just reinforcing the implicit norms of behavior, but are explicitly saying, this is what we need for all of us to flourish. Does that distinction make sense? There are some nods. Okay. The other role of churches is truth-telling. And so, in conclusion, this is not where the sermon ended, but we had a little bit of a technical mishap this morning, and the last page of the sermon has been swallowed by the internet. So this is not the hopeful ending that I thought I was going to end on, but here's my hope. Going forward, we get real explicit about the expectations we have for one another. We already do that a little bit here. But I see, and people come and tell me, all of the times the implicit stuff has made them feel unwelcome. That's hard. That's hard for everybody in this congregation, right? Often it's two people who have been upset with each other about norms that they hold for each other. The more we can get this stuff explicit, the more we can get it into the written covenant that we agree to, the better off we all are. That's what allows the community to flourish. It's not the same thing as saying you have to wear a jacket and tie on Sunday morning. It is saying we have to be clear about how we treat each other. May that always be the case, and amen. And with that, we'll do our last piece of guest music. Okay, I remembered the conclusion. What do we do about people that visit? That's the conclusion. Right, that whole sermon was about us as a community that already exists, but it leaves out, what do we do when people come to visit us for the first time? We welcome them. We welcome them. We say, come in. We are so glad to have you with us. We are so glad that you are a part of this community today. That's it. And then, as it comes up after a couple Sundays, say, here's what we're about. This is a place where we lift each other up. And we take that seriously. We treat each other well here. And when we don't, we call each other on it. We are so glad that you are with us. Welcome, come, be a part of this community with us. That's it. That's the end. Welcome, we are so glad that you are a part of this community with us. May it always be that way. Our closing hymn is aspirational. It's an old spiritual. We have taken out the first verse, which is God's going to set this world on fire. The Unitarian Hymnal Commission did decide to take that one out, and they put it in our hymnal. But it is not a description of what's here already. It's a description of what we are building together. So will you please rise in body or in spirit and join in singing, We're Gonna Sit at the Welcome Table. One last announcement. You're not going to get out of this without hearing this from me at least once a week for the next 6 weeks. We are doing our annual giving campaign right now. So, when you go out to coffee hour, there are going to be board members with blue folders like this. There's also a stack of these blue folders on the table out back in the gallery space. Please take one. They have directions to have conversations with one other member of this church about the things that you love here. Then, in here, there is a pledge form. Please fill out the pledge form. Please do not make us have a whole service in October saying, nobody's filled out their pledge forms yet, please don't do it. I don't want to write that sermon. You don't want to hear me give that sermon. Have these conversations now. With that, we'll close, go to coffee hour, have a great day, and amen. Oh, and leave the folders here. We lost 3 of them last week. We lost 3 out of the 10. Please take the pledge form and put the folder back. All right.